Hi there, I'm your host, Mr. Doyle, and this is a great undertaking. On this channel, it's all about Stephen King, and in this particular series, I'm going through anything and everything that relates to King's first published collection of short stories, Night Shift. In this video, I will be taking a look at the 1985 film Cat's Eye, which, like so many King adaptations from the 80s, suffers from bad acting, lame special effects, a god-awful synth soundtrack with a smattering of cheesy gags and humor. To be clear, these pitfalls are not exclusive to 80s King adaptations, but can be found in a multitude of horror films of the era. In fact, I feel that so much of the artistic output of the decade was not good. This is an unpopular opinion I hold, but I stand by my convictions. The worst music and movies in history came from the 80s. You don't have to agree with me on this, but you do need to understand that you're wrong. History and background. Cat's Eye is a 1985 feature-length film which features two short stories from Night Shift, Quitters Incorporated, and The Ledge, as well as a third story entitled General that was written specifically for the film. The film had a budget of $7 million and grossed over $13 million at the box office. Not too shabby. The initial reviews from critics were mixed, to say the least. Roger Ebert gave the film 3 stars out of 4 and wrote, quote, "Stephen King seems to be working his way through the reference books of human phobias, and Cat's Eye is one of his most effective films," unquote. Variety wrote, "The 3 stories just don't connect, and efforts to join them never work. However, an excellent roster of talent does try its best," unquote. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called the film, quote, "the best screen adaptation of any of King's work since Brian De Palma's Carrie," unquote. Which, this may be the most asinine statement ever made. The Shining, Creepshow, Christine, Cujo, The Dead Zone, Children of the Corn, and Firestarter all came out in the nearly 10 years between Carrie and Cat's Eye, and they are all arguably better than Cat's Eye. What the f*** are you talking about, Vincent? Is it by the book? Written by King himself, the movie utilizes an adventurous feline in an effort to thread the 3 featured stories together. There was originally a prologue that explained why the cat was involved, but against director Louis Teague's wishes, the studio decided to cut the prologue because it was deemed to be too silly. Now, first of all, they should have kept the prologue, because how all the stories are supposed to tie together, frankly, isn't apparent without it. The stories don't appear to be interconnected in any way. Also, there is plenty of silly shit in this movie, so it seems to me they could have kept the prologue in there without it being detrimental to the overall vibe of the film. Since only 2 of the 3 stories in Cat's Eye are based on stories from Night Shift, this by-the-book segment will only cover Quitters Incorporated and The Ledge. Quitters Incorporated. This story was one of my favorites from Night Shift, and it would have easily translated to film as it was written, and while this adaptation takes some detours, the majority of the story remains intact. However, it is when the film strays from the source material that it fails to deliver. There's one particular scene that involves our lead character, Dick, as played by James Woods, that is not in the story, and essentially Dick is at a party where he just starts inexplicably hallucinating, and it's just completely cartoonish. The overall vibe of the story is laughable, and at no point is the dread and terror of the original short story present. This portion of the movie is by the book in a lot of ways, but it's the delivery and tone that are way off base. The Ledge. This story from Night Shift is tense and moves with deliberate, heart-pounding intensity. This portion of the film, however, not so much. Don't get me wrong, the acting isn't terrible and the sets are pretty cool, but the tension from the original story just isn't there. I didn't hate it, but it doesn't deliver the severity of the original story. Additionally, there are a number of not-so-discreet King-related Easter eggs in this movie, Cujo, Christine, The Dead Zone, and Pet Sematary are all referenced, most in blatant, unsubtle ways. Soundtrack and score. 80s synth soundtracks are my least favorite soundtracks. Corny-sounding horn emulators, warbling bass synths, and painfully bad, chiming, artificial bell melodies abound. The compositions themselves aren't terrible for the most part. It's the means with which they are performed that I just can't stand. The soundtrack is at its best when there are simple droning organs and single-note sustained violins to add tension. Cast and acting. James Woods delivers one of the few memorable performances in this movie in his role as Dick in Quitters Incorporated. He's fine. A young Drew Barrymore is featured in the film as well during the final portion of the movie, which is the story General, which turns out to be the name of the cat that is running throughout these stories. Drew does great for the short time she is in the movie. Everyone else is all right, and no one delivers a terrible performance, but no one delivers anything noteworthy either. Special effects and cinematography. The special effects in Quitters Incorporated are few and really only show up in the aforementioned hallucination scene. While they are out of place, as was this entire scene, they are executed fairly well, but it all comes off as being pretty silly. They do a good job in The Ledge at portraying the action and making the circumstances believable. The shots are well done, and some of the effects are pretty decent for the time. In the final leg of the film, General, there's a devious little gremlin creature that is clearly a dude in a suit, but they manage to make him appear really small when interacting with the objects and the humans around him. It's a convincing job, especially for having been made in the 80s. In some scenes, it appears as though they actually recreated the furniture and toys in the bedroom on a massive scale in order to give the appearance that the gremlin was small. That must have been quite a task, and is the coolest part of the movie in my opinion. Final thoughts. This movie wasn't entirely terrible, but the bad jokes, lack of horror vibes, mediocre acting, and god-awful soundtrack made it mostly unenjoyable for me. It has its moments, but overall I wasn't feeling it. If you haven't seen this, you should probably keep it that way. If you have seen it, well, I guess we both wasted an hour and a half of our lives. Okay, goodbye. Be sure to click like and subscribe to the channel for my continued analysis of all things Stephen King, pretty pleased with blood and guts on top. My name is Mr. Doyle, and this has been a great undertaking.